That's not fair that we get 2 clips.
But got 2 editors.
Yeah, fair enough.
And yeah, let's talk about co-editing projects.
Well, we actually didn't, but I had started on the project right before the pandemic, and then had to shut down, and we were only 8 days in. So when we resumed and things went on for a little over a year, I had another project that I had already been committed to, so I had to leave for that. But then we had our little baton pass where we had a good overlap together, kind of talking about the issues in the film and the things we needed to hone and improve and where we thought things were. I left around the director's cut right afterwards. And that, in some ways, is a great moment to have that transition because, I've started to set into certain things and that's kind of the point where you start to lose some objectivity, but it's great to have some of the other voices that come into the process then, but also ideas. And, we were lucky enough that Myron was available that we could do that transition and kind of do it gracefully and stay in communication just to kind of touch base about where things were, what things we had tried before, the bodies that were buried several months before that I could point him to, and the other things that he brought to that equation.
Of course, the film's done at director's cut, right? So it's, then I was on it for another 8 months trying to figure out the movie. And I think that my task was, and it was a little difficult at first because nobody had seen it other than a couple producers and myself, and we're in the middle of a pandemic pre-vaccination, and both of us potted with Lin, so we lived with him while we were cutting the film, and but I didn't have any data. I didn't know if anybody would be confused by something or like this character. And when we started screening it, people were both confused and hated Jonathan Larson. And I was like, oh shit, like we're fucked. What am I gonna do about it? And so, but Andy had already done some beautiful work, and I was such a huge fan of his anyways from his other films. And I just tried to not take a sledgehammer to it, try to figure out a nuanced way to keep working on the musical numbers, work on character. I knew that Andrew Garfield was giving an Oscar-nominated performance. I just needed to find other ways to access him other than a guy just complaining about, turning 30 and making his music. And, it took some time, but, just keeping at it. And of course, there was some reshoots and figuring out, how to open and close the movie, how to cut down and keep working on something like therapy. So both Andy and I were working on that in different ways for over a year. Just keeping the pedal on and not giving up on it.
So were you working on the same material at any given time, or?
No.
No.
I stopped, he started. So,
it was really 2 brains. It's so much easier to have 2 brains on one problem because you're really, you keep, he has one solution to it, and I go like, okay, well, I have a different idea on that. And then we could talk a little bit, and it's like, oh yeah, I've tried that, and like, well, let me give it another shot. Or it was really helpful to have somebody else to bounce ideas off. That's why I like cutting larger films sometimes, because you can have multiple editors, or TV shows where you can go into someone else's edit room and pick their brain. And so that we had a little of that, but we were never really on the cut at the same time.
But you were always talking?
We would check in pretty regularly, yeah. I was aware of like when there were audience screenings and stuff because I was pretty curious about that. That's the thing you kind of are desperate for, to be able to sit in a room and watch how people feel when they're watching the movie. Even just your director, you always have to have some energy in the room that you can tell, okay, that great moment doesn't work, or that works differently or better, or what have you. I knew that it was pretty important to this film that there was a real calibration process that was going to happen, because there's a certain kind of almost Woody Allen neuroses to this character that's a little unappealing in context when you consider what's happening to his friends and how ultimately selfish he is as a character, and that his evolution is to start to care about other things beside himself by the end of the film, and the impact that he made as a person. But be able to get there with him was something that I talked about with Lin a lot, that we knew we had a range there, and we had to see what our threshold was with people.
Did you watch the cuts as they were, every month or so, or anything like that?
I think we mostly I watched like 2 or 3 of them. It was pretty spaced out, but we talked a lot about
Andy
what was happening.
he was like, you're going to sink with Lin or you're going to swim with Lin. I mean, you're pretty adamant for me to form my own relationship with him, and it was good because I couldn't rely on him to be like this thing to save me. I had to, and you think like with filmmakers like Ron Howard as our producers, I kept reaching out like, maybe you can solve the problem. And there was like nobody. It was like me and Lin in the edit room, occasionally Steve Levinson, but Andy was gracious enough and smart enough to just say like, it's your baby now.
Yeah, it's very counterintuitive to the process. If I was just kind of looming in the background to check in on, for both Lin and yourself, I mean, that relationship is so important, that he's the right hand there, and that the trust needs to be there and everything. If I'm inserted in that, it's kind of hard to develop.
And also, Lin didn't know where any of the bodies were buried. Like, he didn't do any of the work. So I had to get to know the project like it was my own. So I had to go back in, start watching dailies again, and treat it like I was starting over. Even if I wasn't going to change a single frame to something, I had to know it. I couldn't let up. Time's up.
Oops. Go ahead.
Anyways, I think that it was a fascinating process because I was really inspired by what Andy had done. But I knew that I had to have my own voice in this thing. And having worked on In the Heights, I knew how to cut musicals, but this was going to be a little bit different. So I just had to apply what I'd already had done the year before and just keep pushing and make this, musicals are the hardest, for me, they're one of the hardest things I've ever cut because they're really hard to cut down. Trying to keep the drama alive and people just engaged for 2 hours is extremely difficult when people are singing. We had the liberty of having a musical performance on the stage to help ground us, but that was also really difficult because most of that stuff is lip sunk. So to make it feel real and actually like we're there, that's why therapy took forever, because I was intricately working with the music editors, slipping every other shot, and something like therapy, you're literally losing your mind trying to understand sync and the zaniness of that number. So it was a process.
Yeah, a lot of it for us was kind of finding our own language and rules for the thing. There was sort of a framework there in the script as to how it was working, but I think I was stumbling on the idea that there was a lot more room for intercutting a juxtaposition than the script implied, and you picked up on that almost right away, that there were a lot of ways to collapse exposition and context and things early on in the first half of the film that was not obvious from the script or how it was shot even. But it also influenced how we cut the musical numbers too, because you're free to go back and forth more instead of sticking to kind of this sacrosanct agenda of how it was shot or what the shots were for each section of a song.
How many scenes were actually dropped? What was left out?
Well, we dropped a big musical number called Green Green Dress, which finally found its way on the internet a couple weeks ago. But so that was a biggie. And then we just dropped a bunch of little scenes with like Vanessa Hudgens' character, who was at one point people thought, or at least I thought, that she was like going to be a romantic interest. So I really tried to limit that because I was like, this has to be about Susan and Jonathan in order to work. We can't believe that there's something else for him, as to save him. It's just going to hurt everything. But there wasn't a ton. There was some restructuring, and this bookend was created in the edit as well, the opening and closing of the film, and the voiceover. None of that was scripted, and just found our way over time. The archival footage, and by the way, like, so influenced by all that jazz and Fosse, and it was always in my head working on this film, like, what would Alan do? And again, talking about intercutting, just allowing, like, anything was game. Like, we could use footage from anywhere else in the film, and we could juxtapose it anywhere. There was moments in swimming that Andy had used, where he's taking off his clothes and the locker closes, and I was like, well, I want to establish that as a rhythm, so I repurposed it earlier in the film. That way we could be reminded of this is a memory, this is something that he does in order to sort of loosen up, writing music.
That's sort of the fun of editing, isn't it? The fact that we can mess around with time. I mean, several of us have said that, and it's kind of thrilling. I did want to ask, so you did have previews after the COVID thing. How many? I mean, and what input was there from the previews? I'm going to ask all of you about that.
Well, first of all, it was horrible in the pandemic, because the first one we did three. The first one we did was a virtual preview in Jersey. It was 2 theaters, and we were sitting in New York, and they were in Jersey. And I'm sorry, not Jersey, Chicago. There were 2 theaters. They were probably maybe half filled each. And it was the most awful experience ever, like, screening that way, because they had masks on, so we couldn't tell their expressions. And that's when the audiences really let us have it. Like, they did not like this film at first. And then we previewed, Netflix has this, I forget what it's called. It's called, like, Film Club or something like that, where Netflix will gather just people all over the country to watch the film, and they watch it from their home. And we don't see them watching it, but there's a focus group the next day, and again, they really let us have it. But let me just say, like, we were learning all through this process. We were learning, like, why didn't they like a character? Why were they confused by something? And every time we did these little tweaks, it just got a little bit better every single time. And then finally, we were finally allowed to do a friends and family. And that friends and family was, of course, everyone loves you at a friends and family, but we also learned that what we had done from those other 2 screenings was working. Like, the confusion was being cut down, their engagement in the character was working, and then we finally had a big screening. This was actually after vaccines finally, in New Jersey, and it was a full packed house, and people loved it. And at that point, we were like, okay, all this worked. All this data collecting and working on the cut. And by the way, we had a little reshoot in there, so that helps a lot. And it's just the process worked, where you literally listen to the audience. It's maybe controversial to say, but I'm a big fan of screening the hell out of your film and previewing and collecting data and learning. I'm making a film for the audience, not for just myself and Lynn in our edit room. So
the other aspect of that, if you listen to it carefully, is that there's nothing like the communal experience, being in a theater with a lot of people watching a movie and enjoying it together, and you can't approximate that any other way.
No, I find the idea of Netflix screening at home and everybody is alone in a room very unpleasant. I mean,